So while watches are in most cases not utilized as the tools they once were, there are still plenty of enthusiasts who care about what their watches and even their luxury watches are capable of. So in this video, we're going to be sharing some of the toughest watches in some of the most popular categories in a wide range of different price points. So before delving into the actual list of tough watches, it's important to take a moment to talk about what it means to be tough, because I want to create a definition here. While there are a lot of watches designed with more rugged or extreme aesthetics, with marketing materials celebrating their hardcore or ultra durable nature, I think it's better to look at more objective realities, looking at things like shock resistance, water resistance, magnetic resistance, case materials, scratch resistance. I think we have over 25 watches on this list, so I'll be going through them pretty quickly, but that's only scratching the surface on this topic. So I can't cover everything, but that is my approach with this video. Also, I'll just break it down to this as well. I mean, I know people are gonna be mentioning a G-Shock. I'm just gonna mention it right at the front. If you are somebody that wants the most robust, toughest watch, probably just go for a G-Shock. I don't want this video to be dominated by G-Shocks. I'm gonna be looking mostly at analog watches here, but I just wanna address right up front, you could do a whole video on G-Shocks. I've done many videos on G-Shocks, so if you're wanting to get into that world, I can link to some helpful resources down below. So I have this video broken down into a few different categories. The first category of watches that we're gonna be looking at is the Pilot/GMT. This is a category of watches where you'll see some of these elevated features come forward. Now for the first watch on our list here, we actually have a micro brand. This is the Traska Venturer GMT. So this watch on the surface looks like traditional approach. You're looking at a diameter of 38.5 millimeters, reasonable lug to lug, 150 meters of water resistance, which is nice to see. We have the Traveler GMT movement on the inside. That is the 9075 from Miyota, sapphire crystal. But the reason why I have this watch on the list is because of its case hardening treatment. Now there have been other brands that have started to roll this out, but Traska was one of the first that I became aware of that was doing this kind of hardening treatment to their cases. For context, 1200 HV on the hardness scale for this case. Untreated stainless steel is around 150 to 200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale. So we're talking multiples of the hardness and scratch resistance here. I've been on the channel before in the past taking one of their lengths and comparing it against a Submariner length from Rolex and just showing, with going at it with a spring bar tool, how different the end result is. Now, I just wanna throw one Seiko 5 on here, and the reason why I wanna throw a Seiko 5 on here is just because these are watches that typically, if you watch any of our collector videos or you talk to collectors, one of the common things you'll notice with some of their watches is that some of the longest running watches they have in their entire collection are Seikos. Here we have a Seiko 5 GMT. This is the SSK GMTs. I would say some of the best releases in the last few years from Seiko. I know there's a lot of people that like the former Seiko 5 DNA, but to me, this is one of the best Seiko 5s ever made, in my opinion. I love these watches. 4R34 movement on the inside helped really change the game in terms of that entry-level point for GMT watches. Still getting 100 meters of water resistance, solid bezel rotation, 42.5 millimeters for the case, really emulating that Seiko SKX 007, 009. And I've just always found that Seiko just produced a surprisingly tough watch, even in the Seiko 5 package. So next up we have Marathon. Marathon started producing watches for the Allied forces in World War II and have developed a reputation around their military style watches that has really been hard to rival. Here we have their Pilot Navigator. So you have a couple different case material options. Here we'll just look at the steel version. This is the latest and greatest from the brand here. So on the inside, high accuracy quartz movement, 100 meters of water resistance, which is a nice jump compared to the former version of the Marathon Navigator. Sapphire crystal, pretty wearable case. Another interesting thing about these cases is how the case itself is going to protect the crown, almost serving up like crown guards. This is Marathon's Pilot watch. It was actually produced and designed from a direct response from the Kelly Air Force Base in Texas in 1986. A brand that absolutely needs to be on here is Sinn. I think Sinn makes some of the toughest mechanical watches in the world. This is going to be the Sinn 105 UTC. Combines a lot of the DNA from their Pilot watches. You look at a watch like the Sinn 104, take the 105 here, takes a similar formula, but then what we'll add to it is the GMT function. I like the stark contrast with these very simple backdrops with either white or black with their dials, and then you have this pop of orange. Very easy to read. You're getting top grade Sellita movement on the inside, typically well regulated as well. I've always had my Zins running within a couple seconds of perfect time of day, usually running within cost parameters. This is just anecdotal evidence, but just what I've seen. Some things you'll notice right off the board is the water resistance rating for these watches. 200 meters for a pilot watch while getting GMT function, sapphire crystal, tegimented bezel options here, and then also you are going to see tegimented cases with a variety of their different watches, which is going to have their up hardness treatment. Next, we move into the dive category, and for the dive category to kick us off, there's a lot of different Seikos you could mention here. I'm going to look at the Arni though. The Arni is not your conventional Seiko dive watch, but that's partially why I thought it made a lot of sense on this list. It has this outer shroud to the case that creates this protective layer, but also is going to just make it look tougher. I know that wasn't part of the criteria for this list here, but I'm gonna let it slide because if it can look like that on Arni's wrist, he can wear it in a movie where he is, fighting Predator. I mean, this can obviously work for us in a day-to-day. This watch now is known as the SNJ025. It's an analog digital display, solar power, which I find is going to be great for everyday functionality. You have 200 meters of water resistance, very easy set it and forget it type of watch. Also an ISO certified dive watch, so this is a professional dive watch. And then I will always say with this piece, I've worn this on my wrist and I was always very surprised about what I originally thought this watch was going to feel like on my wrist. It was one thing, but then I put it on my wrist for the first time and I'm like, wait, this actually surprisingly works. And also I love just how these hands work in tandem with the digital display to show the correct time. It's just a very cool feature to see for the first time. Next we have Marathon again. This is with the G-Star. This was the watch that was issued in the early 2000s for Canadian search and rescue operators. It's still available through government contracts for certain military organizations to this day. Available in some different case sizes. You have 36, 46, as well as the more conventional size of 41 millimeters, which 41 millimeters doesn't really tell the full story. This watch, if you look at the central case, not the bezel, kind of closer to 39.5 millimeters. So I'd say this wears like a true 40. You have that knurled crown, deep set dial with the tritium tubes on it. But this was a piece that was developed for search and rescue operations. So you're getting something that's going to be able to take the wear and tear. Next, we have a brand that I have just gained so much appreciation for in the last few years. This is Certina. They make some of the best dive watches for around $1,000, and this is one of the examples of that with the DS PH1000M. This is a piece that on the surface just looks like a conventional dive watch, but one of the main reasons why Certina was able to rise to this status was with their DS system. So this is actually a way for the case and the movement to be protected within the case that was really revolutionary in the mid-20th century and is a big part of their model DNA. This also allowed them to develop this pedigree when it comes to dive watches. This was used in the underwater Tektite trials and then also has been used by clearance divers for the Australian Navy. So now we move back to Zin, and Zin is mostly known as a pilot watch aviation brand being founded by a flight instructor, but Zin also has some crazy tanks for dive watches. Here we have the U50 and the U1. I like the U50 just because it wears better for my wrist, but you could go for either of these. These are over-engineered dive watches that are going to have extreme water resistance. You also have the tegimented case options available. The SDR variants just look, for lack of a better term, badass. Just look at the contrast with these cases. This just looks amazing to me, and I know for some it might not resonate the same way as it does to myself, but this just speaks to that German utilitarian design. High scratch resistant cases, very similar to 1200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale. Again, untreated, around 150 to 200 for stainless steel. These are just watches that are built like tanks. Very easy to read and feel substantial when you have them on the wrist. Next, we have a brand that I recently visited in Glashütte, Germany, actually a family-owned company, multi-generational family, where the family is still at the helm, which is very rare for the broader industry of watchmaking, where you can sit down with somebody that still has the same name as the people that were responsible for starting it years and years ago. This is Mühle Glashütte. This is their SAR rescue timer. This watch is unlike really anything else on the market. Mühle actually started back in the 1860s in Glashütte, Germany, first not producing wristwatches. They didn't produce wristwatches until well past 100 years in their history as a business. Instead, they were producing timing instruments, speedometers. They were even working with brands like BMW, marine chronometers as well, really developing this reputation as specialists for these different instruments. But in 2001, Mühle had a connection with the Maritime Search and Rescue Association in Germany, and this was where the SAR rescue timer was born. It needed to be able to withstand these search and rescue missions aboard these very turbulent waters on boats in the North Sea. And in 2002, the watch was unveiled. So a couple things I'll call attention to with this watch. For one, they probably just spring out to you immediately, is the rubber bezel. So unlike anything else you're going to find, you'll also find on the bracelet rubber links on the bracelet. The other point that I'll bring up with these watches too is going to be the crystal. That crystal on this watch, and it is not domed like to a crazy effect where you're looking at it from a side profile and you're like, wow, that's a very domed crystal. This 4mm is really hidden as you look at it from the side. It is really set right over that dial to protect it. Also, what you'll notice, which is pretty interesting, is that this does have a cyclops for the date, but you're not going to see any bubble on the outside of that crystal because they didn't want it to chip, but they wanted to be able to read that very easily. How they did it? They hid it within the crystal. So that is why that thickness is there. Very robust watch. Will be able to take a beating and really unlike anything else you're going to find. So a series of videos that we do on this channel is our Real Collector series, where we sit down with somebody that just shares their collection, talks about how watches connect with their day-to-day life. They have an occupation. How does the watch connect to it? If you've not seen our episode with Tom Place, he is a professional stuntman. So getting thrown out of buildings, out of cars, falling all over the place. I mean, has worked with Spielberg, Scorsese, like big names. And he had this watch. This is the Tudor FXD, the Tudor Fix. One thing that he brought up, which I think is a really good point when you're talking about tough watches, you have these very robust, well-constructed pieces of metal. And then you have these small little flimsy spring bars at times that can be attached to these watches. And when you are getting thrown around and you're trying to have a watch that's going to be able to withstand these crazy circumstances, that spring bar is going to be more likely to fail than the watch itself. So this moves away from ever having that issue from not having traditional spring bars, just will allow you to have pull-through straps. Apart from that, good water resistance, robust movement on the inside, COSC certification, great lume to go along with it, and solid build quality from top to bottom. Another brand that I feel needs to be mentioned here is Panerai. Panerai to me just screams tough watch with this large crown guards and just the silhouette of the cases themselves. Here we're gonna look at the submersible. This is the PAM 01068. I like the submersible. I know that this isn't the purest design that so many people like from Panerai, but for me, I really do enjoy the way that these watches look and how they wear on the wrist. 42mm makes for a reasonable size. Panerai needs to be classified in its own way just because of what is the approach of the brand, what is the history of the brand. I look at it in a different light. You have the automatic P900 movement on the inside, sapphire crystal, ceramic insert which gives some up scratch resistance in the process, and that crown locking system is going to be one of one in the industry. Next, we move into a very extreme dive watch. We have two extreme dive watches here. First, though, is the Omega Seamaster Ultra Deep 6,000 meters. So if you have a watch that is going to be based off of a prototype watch that was able to go down to the Marianas Trench, chances are the watch is going to be rather tough, and this is going to be the case with the Ultra Deep. Now, this is a big watch at 45.5mm. It does wear smaller. I know we hear this all the time, but with a 51.6mm lug to lug, certainly not small, but is going to be able to be pulled off by more than what many might expect. Here we have the 75th anniversary edition. So this has this darkened ceramic bezel, and also for the dial has this liquid enamel effect where it creates this wave-like pattern, but then you get the real action happening when you turn off the lights. If you have a UV light, you can see the hidden message where it shows Omega was here, referring to the depth rating of the prototype watch in which this watch is based on. But ceramic bezel, master chronometer on the inside with that 15,000 Gauss, and then in addition to that, if you were worried about it, 6,000 meters of water resistance. And then for the other extreme dive watch, we have the Rolex Sea Dweller. This is the 126600. This is again a watch that's very similar to that of the Ultra Deep, kind of going more for this extreme saturation environment. Here we have 1,220 meters of water resistance. Rolex's automatic movement on the inside. This is the 3235. Ceramic insert, also coming with a helium escape valve at the 9 o'clock side that is going to be integrated within the case, so you're not going to create any extra wear in terms of having this on the wrist. This is much more wearable in comparison to something like the Ultra Deep, but still, relatively speaking, a larger watch. Now we shift into the chronograph category, and for our first watch here, we have the Citizen ProMaster NaviHawk 8T. So this is a sub-collection of Citizen that I would say is the good side of Citizen. The ProMaster collection, I would say, is underrated for what they are doing. These are true enthusiast watches and true professionally spec'd watches. You have a diameter here that doesn't wear near what it actually does on the wrist, 48 millimeters to 52 millimeter lug to lug, but 200 meters of water resistance. You are also getting a sapphire crystal. This is more of a technical pilot watch display. It's designed to look more like a modern jet heads-up display. You have atomic timekeeping, which adds great utility, will be accurate. All these functions also are coming on top of the EcoDrive format with solar power, quartz oscillation. It is a beautiful combination for a set it and forget it type of watch. You have a chronograph function, day of the week, perpetual calendar, 12 and 24-hour markers, a slide rule, power reserve indicator, and then easy swap within time zones. For the watch we have next, we have the Damasco DC56. Damasco was first started in 1994. They're another German tool watch brand that once produced cases for Sinn, a brand that we've seen on this list a few times. Damasco still utilizes ice hardening for the process for their stainless steel, so that's going to allow that scratch resistance to get to extreme levels, around 1200 HV on the Vickers hardness scale. This particular pilot-oriented watch also is going to conform to the military standard, the 810. Next, we have Fortis. Now, Fortis is another brand that I would classify in a very similar light to that of Damasco, as well as Sinn, just really robust watches. And this is their Novanaut. So this is the follow-up to the very popular, really the flagship model for the brand, the Cosmonaut. This piece was actually tested, or the movement was tested in space. Back in 1994, Fortis actually became an official watch of the Russian Federal Space Agency and actually was worn in space. But 200 meters of water resistance, a sapphire crystal, and then for the movement also coming with a column wheel. So next up we have Breitling with the Endurance Pro. This is one of the entry doors into the world of Breitling, but very much is its own thing. So the material here is Brightlight for this case. It's a material that is claimed to be 3.3 times lighter than titanium and 5.8 times lighter than stainless steel. In practice, it feels like a carbon case. Quartz chronograph movement on the inside, so you are going to get great shock resistance in the process here, 100 meters of water resistance. And this is a piece that is commonly used and marketed around the whole world of endurance sports, including the Ironman triathlon. Now we shift into the field everyday category, and the first watch here is one that so many enthusiasts love. This is the Seiko Alpinist. This is the SPB 121, basically the successor to the former beloved SARB 017. Now, part of the reason why these watches caught on, at least the SARB 017 and now this watch, is yes, it has a very memorable design. You have the cathedral handset, the green backdrop for the dial, the gold accents on that dial, but really what allowed it to separate was the utility of this piece and the connection to Japanese alpinists and how this was more of an expedition explorer's watch. But with that came 200 meters of water resistance. You have the 6R35 movement on the inside with that extended power reserve, sapphire crystal. It's really just more of this over-engineered manufacturing for a field style watch. You find many field watches 50 meters to 100 meters. This doubles it up with 200 meters, sapphire crystal, one of the entry door points for getting into more of that Seiko Lux line of watches with the 6R35 movements. And although you can't brag about this too much, but for Seiko you can because they use hard Lux so often, but you're getting a sapphire crystal here, and this is one of the entry points to getting that from this brand. Now for our next piece, we have a brand that is not commonly known for producing wristwatches the same way they are producing tools of other sorts. But here we have the Victorinox Inox Mechanical. This is a piece that you get this on the wrist, it feels like a tank. It is substantial, it's well constructed. It is a heavier piece, especially on the bracelet, 43 millimeters, 53.1 millimeter lug to lug, so it is a larger watch, but it is going to cover you in a lot of different scenarios. 200 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal, automatic Salida movement on the inside, and coming from a brand that knows a thing or two about producing products that are made to last. I mean, we hear the term Swiss Army knife. I mean, this is the brand that is responsible for that. So you learn a thing or two when you're able to combine that general approach and fuse it into a wristwatch. Next, we have the Ball Fireman Enterprise. Ball is a Swiss brand, formerly based where I am from in Cleveland, Ohio, so I have a lot of affinity and connection to this brand. One of the very rare brands to use tritium tubes, but also was a brand that was one of the early pioneers of producing railroad chronometers as the railroad industry in the United States was expanding out. But nowadays, they're really known for more of their kind of robust tool watches. I find a lot of people that are into brands like Zen, Mula, Fortis, brands like this might also have a lot of interest in Ball. This is more their entry-level option, so it doesn't have all the bells and whistles of some of their other pieces, but 100 meters of water resistance, sapphire crystal, tritium tubes on the inside, reliable third-party caliber, just no nonsense. And I find Ball watches to be very robust, and tritium, one of the very few instances where you're getting this across the industry, used in a lot of military applications because it is a constant illuminating material compared to superluminova, which doesn't need to be charged and will be in complete darkness, more usable. Now for this final watch, I think some might be saying, is this really one of the most, like the toughest watches in the world of watchmaking? In some ways, no, it's not, but in other ways, I think it excels and was a leader in a category that it excelled at, and this is the Omega Aquaterra. Now, I'm not gonna be looking at the shades versions, I'm looking at more of the teak dial versions, because if you look at the Aquaterra, it's a line that was started in 2002, and where I see the Aquaterra representing within Omega's broader collection is kind of what the Railmaster was of the past. Take that DNA and fuse some Seamaster DNA, and voila, you have the Aquaterra. The Aquaterra was also the vehicle for which we started to see this 15,000 Gauss become the standard that Omega has really pioneered in the industry and set the standard for. You saw that with that Bumblebee model from years ago, but now reaching 15,000 Gauss, that is essentially an MRI machine levels that we're talking about here. So to be able to withstand that level is insane for magnetic resistance. And that is where the Aquaterra shines and really separates itself, I think, from many others. And this was the product from Omega that was responsible for getting that magnetic resistance off the ground. But apart from that, 8,900 movement here on the inside, master chronometer, 150 meters of water resistance, so outdoing the traditional Oyster water resistance of 100 meters, sapphire crystal, and although you do have polished links and a lot of polished surfaces on these watches, so that might detract from that tough nature and might not go hand in hand with it and compared to like brushed material. But with the master chronometer and the magnetic resistance, it is a hard watch to find a direct peer for in today's world of watchmaking in that regard. But all right guys, that's my video here today looking at some of the toughest watches on the market. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon if you want us to do even more of this, because I think this is a category where you can double up on some of the watches. I could have made this list probably 50, if not more watches long if we wanted to. So I'm happy to revisit the topic in the future. If you'd like us to, please leave some comments down below if you'd like us to do that. Also, be sure to check out TeddyBalderStore.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. How we're able to fund all of our productions here is through selling watches. So if you are in the market for a watch, we'd love to have your business. We know you can get a watch in a lot of different places nowadays, but it allows us to keep doing what we're doing here. We love what we do. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.